back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Professor Joe Phoenix has co-authored a new report on gender-critical belief discrimination in employment tribunal judgments. The summary, entitled Don't Get Caught Out, explores what the implications of victories in the courts may have. So here to tell us all about it is Professor Joe Phoenix. Joe, thanks for coming back to the show. So I want to ask you about the report that you've co-authored. What are the chief findings?
There's one startling finding. Normally, with belief discrimination cases, about 50 to 60% of them are settled either through ACAS or, fall out of the system, and only about 9 to 12% win, right? However, with the gender-critical cases that we've seen, admittedly, it's relatively small numbers in comparison to, the 500 or 600 a year of belief discrimination. But what we're seeing is exactly the opposite. So with the gender-critical cases, particularly the secular gender-critical cases, we're winning at an 83% rate.
Now, that's astonishing. And just to clarify for people watching, so these are individuals, academics, who have made gender-critical points of view, perfectly legitimate beliefs protected by law, and have been harassed, bullied and intimidated at work. This happened to you.
Yes, indeed.
Of course, to such a severe extent that you were eventually diagnosed with PTSD.
Yep.
Terrible behaviour at the Open University.
Correct.
So it's absolutely clear from your report, from what you're saying, that this is clearly illegal and everyone who's engaged in it will continue to lose in the courts.
Yes, yeah.
So why do they carry on doing it?
Well, that's a great question. So I once asked Aqua Reindorf-Casey, who is a specialist in these matters, how we can turn these judgments into justice. Right, because that's really the question that you're asking, isn't it? How can we create organizational change? Her retort to me was, the judgments are justice. So there is a problem because the employment tribunal system doesn't work to change employment places. You get compensated for the horrible things that happen to you, but it doesn't, if an employer wants to carry on discriminating, they can. So I think what we're beginning to see, though, just in the last few cases, so we've got the Roz Adams Edinburgh rape crisis coming up. We've had Lizzie Pitts, who settled on the steps to the court. We're beginning to see in these cases the legal teams going after costs. Right, that's unusual in an employment tribunal.
Right.
And the only time you get awarded costs is if the other side has behaved so badly that it offends the court, in effect. But we're beginning to see costs awarded now.
And money talks.
Oh, money talks.
Yes.
Money talks.
And this is the thing, isn't it? When you have this kind of degree of ideological capture, it's almost as though these judgments aren't going to matter. I mean, in your case, with the Open University, they should have just come out straight away and said, we were wrong, I can't believe this happened, it'll never happen again. That didn't happen, did it? Oh,
my goodness, it did not happen, no. And in fact, treating myself as an example rather than myself, if you follow what I mean, if you look at the progression of the cases, so we had Forstater, sex is immutable, and that's a protected belief. Then we have Bailey, and the tiny bit that got added to the case law there is that it also covered sexuality. Right? And then we had Denise Farmy's judgment.
Who has also been on this show,
Yeah, who's also been on this show. And that was actually just about how a workplace organisation where her colleagues had issued a petition and acted appallingly. The managers tried to intercede, but they didn't do it quickly enough. So suddenly we're getting, OK, what's the managers doing, right, in the cases? And then my case comes, and that's quite a ground shift, because the judgment in that case actually said there's a dominant workplace gender-affirmative culture. And in a situation like that, managers, well, in the OU, managers were institutionally fearful, institutional cowardice.
Right.
So they didn't act, and that's where they fell down. And then by the time we get to Roz Adams, there's yet another layer that's added, and that was extreme gender ideology.
So is it the case that these have a cumulative effect?
Yes, they do. I mean, nobody has to pay attention to an employment tribunal judgment, right? It's advisory only, but they still accumulate.
So the OU, of course, commissioned their own response to the judgment in your case.
Yes.
I'm gathering you're not impressed by it.
Sorry, I don't mean to actually smile and laugh, but I can smile and laugh a year later now. Yeah, the Dandridge Review, I feel for Nicola Dandridge. She took the job on. The terms of reference are just about as rotten as you can get, because they are how to balance academic freedom and freedom of speech with EDI.
Which equity, diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, equity, diversity.
Which, of course, is an ideological stance. Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you, as soon as you put anything after, balance academic freedom, freedom of speech with...
Yes.
Doesn't matter what it is, right? It's going to go hideously wrong.
Absolutely.
So it was supposed to be an independent review, but Professor Dame Nicola Dandridge was, in fact, the CEO of the Office for Students at the time that I was suffering at the OU. The Office for Students has a regulatory function over universities. And in fact, some of your audience may realize the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act that Labour just halted recently, that gave the Office for Students new powers to enforce universities to uphold academic freedom. So she has some knowledge about why it is that we needed an enforcement mechanism.
Yes.
Didn't do anything about it. She accepts a brief that balances academic freedom with EDI. She bases everything, I think, looking at it on the Higgs decision, right? That's, you know, as Maya Forstater once called it, the sniff it test, to see if the ideas are offensive. But then what she does, which in my head just partly blows my mind and why I keep giggling about it, is she speaks to about 100 people at the OU. She asked to speak to me. I declined the invitation. And she speaks to them, and she treats what they say at face value. So quite a few of the people said, we find gender-critical beliefs offensive and they take away our rights. She didn't subject that to any question. She just took it at face value.
Well, as you say, she's balancing this idea of academic freedom against other people's feelings.
Yeah.
Effectively.
100%.
So finally, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, has curbed the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. She did it the day before Parliament went into recess to prevent any debate from happening, or at least that's what it looks like to me. How can we make people understand that there is a problem with threats to academic freedom? Well,
I actually think, I want to believe that the fact that it's a problem has already been established. Right. So the real question is, how can we make people want to do something about it? Now, the do something that we need, universities, and, you know, I'm one to say this, having been cancelled by 2, universities get away with what they get away with because there's no enforcement mechanism, right, apart from a very expensive employment tribunal. And there's no enforcement mechanism if I'm a speaker, as we found out, an external speaker, as we found out from the Reindorf report. So the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, it needs to be implemented.
Yes.
And I think if I was going to give one message, it's kind of like it's a non-partisan issue that needs to be implemented because universities cannot and will not sort themselves out.
Professor Jo Phoenix, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And next on Free Speech Nation, chief political writer at Spiked, Brendan O'Neill, will join me to talk about his new book that documents the reaction to the October 7th